Good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day. Today's scripture is a little different than what I told Sue, so it's not in the program correctly. But it is Proverbs 22, verse 6 and 15, and Proverbs 23, verses 13 to 14. Teach your children right from wrong, and when they are grown, they will still do right. All children are foolish, but firm correction will make them change. And don't fail to correct your children. You won't kill them by being firm, and it may even save their lives. So, meanest mother in the world. When Susan Baracco and Sue Stedman asked me to do this well, they've been asking for a few years, and I flatly said no for a few years. But this year I said, okay, fine. I'd be happy. I have no idea what I would say that would be of interest to anyone. They assured me I'd be fine, I'd do a great job, and they signed me up. I struggled a lot with what to talk about. I went to Pastor Ruth and said, what direction should I go? And she simply smiled at me and said, you'll know. Needless to say, not the answer I was looking for. But she also lent me a book titled Home is Where Your Mom Is by James W. Moore. And when I sat down to read it, I had just retreated to my bedroom after yet again ruining one of my children's lives by saying no to their request. I flipped open the book and turned to a poem titled The Meanest Mother in the World. Well, this was unbelievable timing, because clearly I was being felt of that way. Maybe Ruth was right, and something would just present itself, and I would know. So after reading the poem, I looked online to see if I could find out more about it. I learned that it was originally a little longer than what was in the book, and it was written by Ann Landers. So here are some excerpts from that poem. I had the meanest mother in the world. While other kids ate candy at breakfast, I had to have cereal, eggs, or toast. When others had Cokes and candy for lunch, I had to eat a sandwich. As you can guess, my supper was different than other kids also. But at least I wasn't alone in my sufferings. My sister and two brothers had the same mean mother I did. My mother insisted upon knowing where we were at all times. You'd think we were on a chain gang. She had to know who our friends were and where we were going. She insisted that if we said we'd be gone an hour, we'd be gone an hour or less, not an hour and 1 minute. The worst is yet to come. We had to be in bed by 9 each night and up at 8 the next morning. We couldn't sleep till noon like our friends could. So while they slept in, my mother actually had the nerve to break the child labor law. She made us work. We had to wash dishes, make beds, learn to cook, and all sorts of cruel things. I believe she laid awake at night thinking up mean things to do to us. She always insisted upon us telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, even if it killed us, and it nearly did. By the time we were teenagers, she was much wiser, and our life became even more unbearable. None of this tooting the horn of a car for us to come running. She embarrassed us to no end by making our dates and friends come to the door to get us. If I spent the night with a girlfriend, can you imagine she checked on me to make sure I was there? I never had the chance to elope to Mexico. Through the years, things didn't improve a bit. We couldn't lie in bed sick like our friends did. Our marks in school had to be up to par. Our friends' report cards were covered with beautiful colors on them, black for passing, red for failing. My mother, being as different as she was, would settle for nothing less than ugly black marks. As the years rolled by, first one, then the other of us was put to shame. We were graduated from high school. None of us was allowed the pleasure of being a dropout. My mother was a complete failure as a mother. Out of 4 children, a couple of us attended higher education. None of us have ever been arrested or divorced. Each of my brothers served his time in the service of this country. And whom do we have to blame for the terrible way we turned out? You're right, our mean mother. Look at the things we missed. We never got to march in a protest parade, nor take part in a riot, or burn draft cards, and 1,000,001 other things our friends did. She forced us to grow up into God-fearing, educated, honest adults. Anne closed her poem by saying, "I stand a little taller, and I'm filled with pride when my children call me mean. Because, you see, I thank God he gave me the meanest mother in the world. This country needs more mean mothers like mine." You are the meanest mother in the world. This is a statement most mothers hear at least once during their children's youth. I know I have certainly heard it multiple times from all 3 of my children. These are words that usually come right after I've said no to a request or have made my children do something they did not want to do. I've said no to getting items despite hearing, "But everyone else has one." I've also made my children do annoying things like giving them a specific bedtime and making them clean their rooms. As a mean mother, I've struggled with the uncertainty of knowing whether the decisions I've made have really been the best decisions for my children. I've wondered, have I hurt my child socially by not letting them go to that party? Is fighting with my child about going to church the right choice? Or am I teaching them to resent church? This last question was a very big struggle for me. I grew up going to an Episcopal church. We went more often than not, but if something else was going on or we were out of town, we didn't make it that week. As an adult, with the exception of my 20s, I followed that same pattern. My husband Brian was raised a Catholic. Church was non-optional on Sundays, and if you couldn't make it Sundays, you went Saturday. It was, mandatory every week. When Brian moved out of his house, he stopped going to church. When we had children, I wanted to raise them as Brian and I had been raised, with a solid Christian foundation. This all seemed fine until Tyler got to be about 9. Suddenly, he was arguing about going to church every week. By the time we arrived, I was in a terrible mood, and he was moping because I'd made him come. This was made harder because Brian didn't join us, and Tyler declared it not fair that Daddy didn't have to come too. This wonderful approach to every Sunday morning happened off and on for the next few years, and each time we battled, I worried about the possible long-term effects that this was having on Tyler's opinion of church. Before I knew it, Tyler was entering 7th grade and was faced with confirmation. He joined the confirmation class willingly, then discovered he'd be having classes and homework on Sunday nights. He complained that weekends were not for school, but I had decided, through our years of struggles, that he was going to make it through the confirmation process before I was going to let him make his own choices about church. I wanted to know that he had the best foundation I could give him before he decided to stop coming. The one bright light during that winter was that despite how grumpy Tyler was when I dropped him off for confirmation class, he was all smiles when I picked him up. He always had a story to tell me when he got into the car. The culminating activity for the confirmands was to write a paper describing why they wanted to join the church. Needless to say, this had school written all over it, and Tyler rebelled. The morning the paper was due, Tyler had still not written anything. "I don't want to join the church," he told me. Now, I don't remember exactly what my response to that was, but I'm sure it was something like, "You can do this." And I went to the grocery store. When I returned later that afternoon, Tyler had written his paper. And I don't know if any of you were here that Sunday, but he knocked it right out of the ballpark. I could not have put my feelings about God and this church into words the way he did. I was so impressed and proud of what he had written. After confirmation, Tyler continued to come to church with me. He also attended several youth group activities during that next year and loved them. Somewhere between making his confirmation and his freshman year in high school, Tyler transitioned from a resistant boy to a faith-filled young man. Watching the person Tyler is turning out to be has made me realize that maybe being the meanest mother in the world was not such a bad idea. One moment. Being a mean mother seems to involve an enormous amount of doubt, especially when you're a mean mother. Did she eat enough? Did I put enough sunscreen on him? Should I take her to the doctor, or am I overreacting? The questions mothers ask themselves are endless, but we plug away and hope that the decisions we make now will not be what our children find to be the root of all their problems when they head to therapy as adults. Fortunately for all of us, there are glimpses of hope scattered along the way that let us know we're doing a good job. And maybe all of the hard work will pay off down the road. These bright moments can be as simple as a hug and a "thank you, Mom," from one of our children. Or they can be bigger. For example, if another adult says, "You must be doing something right because your children are really great." Oh, the pride and joy that runs through us. You're proud of your children and thrilled to know that maybe you're doing a good job after all. One summer afternoon when Sydney was about 3, she and I were packing up to leave the beach. She had most of her sand toys, a boogie board, and a towel down at the water's edge. Thinking I was being helpful, I carried the sand toys and the towel and asked her to drag the boogie board. This did not go over very well with Sydney. She cried and whined that it was too hard to drag the board and that she was too tired. Couldn't I carry her up the beach too? But as a mean mother, I made her drag that horrible, heavy board with her. Now, mind you, it was dead low tide, so we had quite a walk ahead of us. And as I walked ahead, Sydney cried and screamed in protest. But she was following me, and she did have the board. At the time, all I could think of was how we were ruining the beautiful afternoon for the other beachgoers. And I was embarrassed to no end. But I kept walking. When I just about reached the parking lot, I passed a woman I'd never seen before. And as I walked past, she said, "I am so proud of you for not giving in to your daughter. You are doing a great job." Well, needless to say, I felt so much better about being a mean mother. To have a stranger give me that support was one of those glimpses of hope that I needed to keep plugging on. As rewarding as it is to have others validate my parenting tactics, it's still hard when I know that I'm breaking my children's hearts when I say no. Although I believe the decision I made is in their best interest, I wish I could get them to realize it. Leah and I recently were at odds because I had said no to something she really wanted. The worst thing about it was one of those times where I didn't have a really good reason as to why. My gut just said this was a bad idea. How do you explain that to a teenager? But even if I'd had a good excuse, she would not have agreed with me. Here's an explanation that one mother gave her child as to why she was so mean. "I was mean because I love you. I loved you enough to ask you where you were going, with whom, and what time you'd be home. I loved you enough to be silent and let you discover that your new best friend was a creep. I loved you enough to make you go pay for the bubble gum you had taken and tell the clerk, I stole this yesterday and I want to pay for it. I loved you enough to stand over you for 2 hours while you cleaned your room, a job that should have taken 15 minutes. I loved you enough to let you see anger, disappointment, and tears in my eyes. Children must learn that their parents aren't perfect. I loved you enough to let you assume the responsibility for your actions, even when the penalties were so harsh they almost broke my heart. But most of all, I loved you enough to say no when I knew you would hate me for it. Those were the most difficult battles of all. I'm glad I won them, because in the end, you won them too. I really like the way she includes how many of her decisions were really hard on her as they were on her child, because I know I feel the same way. In the end, I guess I'm proud of being a mean mother. I will continue to hold my head up and tell myself that I'm not being mean because I'm a mean person. I'm being a mean mother because I love my children so much that I know it's okay if they don't always like me. When your child tells you you were mean, take it as a compliment. It means you're doing something right. So to all you mothers out there, I say go ahead and be the meanest mothers in the world. Thank you.